He says there's various sources for an embodied deity, including popular religious ideas at the time, the Stoic metaphysics, and literally construed Old Testament scripture. They let the scripture dictate how God was, of course. That's the simplest way. That's Occam's razor. When it says God has face, hands, back parts, as he told Moses, that's what it means. It's common knowledge that ordinary persons, including the early Greeks, have always naturally conceived of God or the gods to be embodied. Furthermore, Harnack proposes that Christians influenced by Stoic views could have reached the same conclusion on metaphysical grounds. From the Stoic beliefs that only matter is real and that God is real, it follows that God is a material being. Now, whatever the impact of popular belief in Stoic metaphysics on the primitive Christian understanding of God was, perhaps a more significant influence was the Hebrew Bible itself. J.N.D. Kelly informs us, from the apostolic age to the middle of the 2nd century, now this is 200 years, there was yet no officially sanctioned New Testament canon. Indeed, for the first 100 years at least in the history of the Church's scriptures, in the precise sense of the word, it consisted exclusively of the Old Testament. Now this is important to get. And, as Harnack reminds us, the Old Testament, literally construed, describes God in decidedly anthropomorphic terms. God has a physical body in our image, just exactly as we have a physical body in the image and likeness of God, as the Genesis creation account dictates. For example, Edmund Charbonneau has shown that the God of biblical revelation, in contrast with the deity of Platonistic metaphysics, he was personal. He wasn't abstract. He was invisible as a matter of choice. It's not inherent in his ontological nature that he cannot be seen. He just doesn't show himself right now. He's everlasting or enduring through time. He's not timeless. And ethically constant. He's not metaphysically immutable. Charbonneau concludes that in many respects, the God of the Bible has more in common with the God of the Greeks and Roman pantheon than with Plato's idea of an ultimate being or of Aristotle's unmoved mover. It's fascinating in this respect, the theme of the Stoics that he notes on page 243, note 9. Stoicism, of course, was founded by Zeno about 300 BC. The Stoics reacted vigorously against the Platonic differentiation of a transcendent, intelligible world not perceptible by the senses from the ordinary world of sensible experience. See, this was Plato's theme. And he put God in that transcendent state. The Stoics reacted against that. They said nothing doing. Whatever exists, the Stoics argue, must be body. And the universe as a whole must be through and through material. Thus, Stoicism was a monism teaching that God, or Logos, is a finer matter immanent in the material universe. This is a very interesting distinction that early Christians also taught us, as we'll see. Now, there's many scriptures in both of the Old and the New Testament that really do straightforwardly describe God in very physical terms. And these scriptures are the scriptures that the early Christians accepted quite literally. And the examples in them are enormous. The Old Testament for the embodied God, Genesis 1:26-27. The early Christians took this at face value. God said, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness." Now, Umberto Cassuto, he explains that there is no doubt that the original signification of this expression, in the image and likeness of God, the original significance of this in the Canaanite tongue was, judging by Babylonian usage, corporeal. in accordance with the anthropomorphic conception of the Godhead among the peoples of the ancient East. So it wasn't only the Jews, it was the peoples of the ancient East that had this corporeal image of God. The Bible captures this beautifully in straightforward language. Even more explicit, there's many references to God's body parts. I, Jacob, have seen God face to face. Genesis 32:30. They saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet. So they saw his feet. That's Exodus 24:10. The Lord spake unto Moses face to face. Now I know that Christian philosophers today say, well, these are called theophanies. These are just God appearing as human. It doesn't make him human. That is not the early Christian belief, nor is it the Jewish belief in the ancient times, and it's not anywhere in the ancient Near East. That theme of just the appearance of God, even though his reality is different, that came because they adapted Platonic and Neoplatonic metaphysics later, in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. And Paulson traces this. Originally, it was simply literal how God appeared to mankind. It's hard to imagine a being with a face, a feet, and hands, and back parts without a body. So they didn't do that. They simply understood the Scripture that way. God also appears embodied in the New Testament. Interesting accounts of divine appearances occur at Acts 7:56, where Stephen, seeing the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God, he was at his right side, next to him. That's precisely how Joseph Smith described his first vision. They took this literally. And Hebrews 1:3 informs us that Jesus Christ, a gloriously embodied being, human-like in form, is in the brightness of the image of his Father and the express image of his person. The Father is a person, as a physical embodied person. This is how they understood this. On the basis of these scriptures, early Christians no doubt simply took it for granted that God has a body in the form of man, of course. But this does not mean that they thought of God as similar to man in all respects. Because unlike man, for example, God is holy, as Hosea 11:9 says, "For I am God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee." Charbonneau acknowledges that a considerable variety exists in Scripture, and that this and similar passages do point away from an overly simple anthropomorphism. However, passages that distinguish God from man do not indicate that the later biblical prophets gave up the idea that God has a body and that man's body was created in his image. To the contrary, Charbonneau claims that modern scholarship, now this is modern scholarship, by restoring these passages of Scripture to their context, and because we've done this, we recover the original meaning, demonstrates that God has a body. It's very interesting. Now that we've had the Neoplatonic philosophy of God not bodied, now that we've reversed that because that's not the original context of Scripture, we see the Scripture teaching God has a body. Only after divine embodiment was rejected on philosophical and primarily Platonistic grounds was the image of God identified with the soul, or with the rational aspect of the soul. Once Platonism took hold of Christianity, biblical passages referring to God's body or bodily parts, these were explicitly given figurative interpretation. And that's where they began to lose the actual meaning of the text. They said, oh no, this is figurative. While the philosophical critique of anthropomorphic conception of deity has its roots in ancient Greece, and while there is evidence for anthropomorphism that was an issue for the translators of the Septuagint, it was Philo Judaeus, a Jewish Platonist who was educated in Alexandria, Egypt, who appears to be the first thinker to apply allegorical interpretation to the Scriptures. That was the beginning of a misunderstanding about the nature and kind of being God is. He allegorized absolutely everything. But how far do you take allegory? If you say, well, the figures of speech in the Bible are allegorical, God doesn't really have a body, even though it says that, that's an allegory. How far do you take allegory? Was Moses himself an allegory?